I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the front door and smelled fresh paint coming from the wrong end of the hallway. At 74, my senses aren't as sharp as they used to be, but a woman knows the scent of her own bedroom. And I knew, even before I stepped inside, that someone had been in mine. Someone who didn't bother asking, someone who believed they had the right. It was quiet in the house, too quiet for a place where a couple and a pregnant woman now lived. My own footsteps felt loud on the hardwood floor George and I had installed 40 years ago. Funny how the echo changed when the balance of a home shifted. Once, this house hummed with our laughter, our arguments, our music. Now it felt occupied, not lived in. I walked toward the bedroom door, already half expecting what I'd see. Still, the sight made something inside me tighten the way a winter branch tightens before it snaps. My dresser was gone. Not pushed aside, not covered, gone. The bedspread I'd sewn myself in my 50s, a patchwork of old shirts and summer dresses, was stuffed into a black trash bag on the floor. My nightstand drawer stood open, my reading glasses thrown on top of a pile of my folded sweaters like an afterthought. And on the wall, Monica had rolled a coat of soft mint paint, the kind you see in nursery catalogs. A color chosen for a baby who wasn't even born yet. A baby who deserved his own space, yes, but not at the cost of erasing mine. "Mom? You're home early." Daniel's voice came from behind me, bright and falsely casual. I didn't turn right away. "What happened here?" He sighed the way he sighs when he thinks I'm being unreasonable. "Monica had a rough night. She barely slept. The guest room is too small. You know how pregnancy is. The baby needs—" "My bedroom," I finished. "Well, yes, it just makes sense. You have the little room down the hall. It's quieter for you anyway. Less stairs. We moved your things." He said it all like he was explaining weather, like nature had simply decided to rearrange my life, and he was merely reporting it. I looked at the mint walls, at the empty space where my dresser had stood since the year Reagan was elected, at the trash bag swallowing the quilt I'd stitched with my own hands. "Daniel," I said slowly, "this is my home." "I know, Mom." He put a hand on my shoulder, gentle but dismissive, the way people touch old ladies they don't quite see anymore. "It's just temporary. A few months. You want the baby to have the best start, don't you?" Ah, there it was. The moral weight they loved to place on my chest. The demand packaged as virtue. If you refuse, you're selfish, cold, unmotherly. I stepped away from his hand. I wasn't asked. He blinked, surprised that I'd said it. "We didn't want to stress you. It seemed obvious. Obvious that I should shrink to make room. Obvious that my needs were negotiable. Obvious that my life, my space, was the most flexible in the house I paid for, maintained, and built with the man I loved." Monica appeared in the doorway, one hand on her lower back, the other on her hip. "Is everything okay?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd already decided it was. "Your mother's upset," Daniel said. "No," I corrected quietly. "Your mother is noticing." They exchanged a glance, the kind that says, "She's being emotional, old, difficult." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't cry. I'm too old for theatrics and too tired for battles waged in words that fall on unlistening ears. Instead, I walked out. Past Daniel's confused frown. Past Monica's tight smile. Past the mint paint claiming the last room in this house that had still felt like mine. I went to the hall closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down a heavy brown folder I hadn't touched in years. My fingers knew its edges well. Inside were documents that still smelled faintly of George's pipe tobacco. The deed, the insurance papers, the old rental forms he had drawn up by hand. My bedroom was gone, but my house wasn't. Not yet. By the next morning, The house no longer sounded like mine. There was a new rhythm, a heavier one, doors closing harder than they used to, footsteps that weren't familiar, voices rising and falling in rooms I once crossed without thinking. Even the kitchen felt different, as if the air itself had thickened with someone else's habits. I stood there for a moment, fingers resting on the counter George built with his own hands, and listened to the muffled hum of their morning routine. Monica's voice floated down the hallway, sharp as a chipped cup. "Daniel, the crib doesn't fit unless we move her chair out. Can you take it to the basement?" Her chair. My chair. The one I used to sit in during storms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. The one where I fell asleep with a book dozens of times. The one George tried to fix 3 times before finally giving up and declaring it a stubborn old thing. I waited for Daniel to answer, to say something like, "Maybe we should ask Mom first." But motherhood, at least the kind I practiced, wasn't contagious. He had never learned to protect me the way I had protected him. "Sure," he said. "She won't mind." I exhaled through my nose, soft but steady, the kind of breath you let out when you learn a truth you always suspected. I boiled water for tea, though I didn't want tea. I just wanted to hear a sound that belonged to me, the whistle of the old kettle, the familiar clank against the stove, something that hadn't yet been replaced or removed. From the hallway came more movement. Monica entered the kitchen wearing one of my aprons, tied wrong, the bow lopsided. She opened my cupboards like they were hers, stacking glasses in new places as if she wanted to erase the memory of where I kept things. "Morning," she said. Not unkindly, not kindly, just the kind of greeting people use when they expect nothing back. "Morning," I replied. She reached for my teapot, the one George bought me on our 30th anniversary. A small porcelain thing with hand-painted violets. I moved a little closer to the counter, not touching anything, simply standing in a way that made her pause. "Oh," she said. "Were you using this?" I was. Her hand hovered, then withdrew, not out of respect, but out of impatience. "I'll just use the other one," she said, already turning to the cupboard. There was no other one. She meant the cheap metal pot she'd brought with her, the one she'd placed on the top shelf, as if preparing the kitchen for new management. Daniel wandered in moments later, smelling of aftershave he only wore when he wanted to appear responsible. "Mom, we need to keep things more organized," he said, while opening drawers that had never bothered him before. "With the baby coming, it's important that we keep the place tidy." "Tidy," Monica echoed, glancing at my teapot as though it were a pile of dirty socks. "Strange, how people can live in your house and still manage to make you feel like the intruder." I poured hot water into my cup. The steam curled up, warm and familiar, brushing my face like an old friend. For a moment, I let it calm me. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Mom, we were thinking, since you're moving to the small room anyway, maybe it's time to go through some of the old stuff, declutter, donate. You know how these houses get when old things pile up." "My things don't pile up," I said quietly. He blinked, as if surprised I'd spoken at all. "I'm just saying it would help us. Help the baby." The baby. The great justification. The umbrella excuse that never seemed to get wet no matter how much rain it caused. Monica chimed in, rubbing her belly in that theatrical way she did whenever she wanted the moral upper hand. "We need space, Martha. Babies come with so much. It's overwhelming." I looked at her, at the apron tied poorly around her waist, at the way she kept adjusting the kitchen as if trying to rearrange the house into a version she could own. "It's temporary," Daniel added quickly. "Just a few months. You'll hardly notice the changes." I noticed everything. I noticed that Daniel had moved my chair without asking. I noticed that Monica had shifted my spices to a different shelf. I noticed that my slippers, which I always kept near the back door, were missing. And when I later found them in the laundry room, wet from being placed on top of a load of Monica's clothes, I realized the change wasn't careless. It was deliberate. A slow pushing, a quiet erasing. I stood there, holding my cup, feeling the weight of the old brown folder tucked safely in my closet. The documents inside weren't loud or confrontational. They didn't shout or accuse. They sat quietly, patient, powerful, waiting for me to decide. "Breakfast?" Monica asked suddenly. She'd already taken out her cereal, her almond milk, her bowl, the one she'd bought and insisted on bringing into my kitchen. "No," I said. "I'll eat later." Daniel exchanged a look with her, the kind children share when their elderly mother starts showing signs. I saw it, I understood it, and I let it pass right through me. Old age is not blindness, nor is silence weakness. I carried my tea to the small room, my new room, and closed the door behind me. The handle clicked softly, not in despair but in decision. If they wanted to treat me like a guest, I would treat them like tenants. The third morning began with a sound I had never heard in my own kitchen before. Someone slamming a cabinet door hard enough to rattle the plates inside. At first, I thought one of the hinges had finally given out, but then Monica's voice cut through the house, sharp enough to scratch the wallpaper. "Daniel, did you tell your mother we need the top shelves cleared? I can't reach anything in this kitchen." There was a pause. Silence thickened, as if even the walls were waiting. Then Daniel's irritated whisper, "Keep your voice down. She'll hear you." "I want her to hear me," Monica snapped. I stood by the bedroom door, my new bedroom, a space barely big enough for a twin bed and a narrow dresser I didn't remember owning, and wrapped my sweater around my shoulders. The mornings felt colder now. Not because of the weather, but because the house didn't breathe with me anymore. It breathed with them. I stepped into the hallway just as Monica stormed past, carrying an armful of my cookbooks, ones she'd apparently decided were clutter. Old hardbacks with broken spines, some with George's notes in the margins. She held them like junk she'd found in the attic. "Morning," she said flatly, not slowing her pace. "Morning," I answered. "Where do you want these?" she asked, not waiting for my reply. "Actually, never mind. They don't fit the aesthetic of the kitchen." The aesthetic of my kitchen. Her words landed with the kind of indifference that bruises rather than cuts. She walked toward the hall closet and shoved the books onto the floor, scattering them like unwanted mail. One slid across the hardwood and bumped softly against my foot. I bent down to pick it up. It was the family bread book, the one George gave me when we first married, because I'd been determined to learn to bake the perfect crust. I ran my fingers over his faded handwriting. "Half cup more water next time. Gee." My throat tightened. Daniel entered the hallway, already stressed, already apologizing for her with his eyes. "Mom, she's nesting. It's a pregnancy thing. Don't read into it." "I'm not reading into anything," I said. "I'm reading what's right in front of me." He didn't like that. Daniel never did enjoy being confronted with truth, especially truth spoken softly. He preferred truth to be loud, so he could dismiss it as hysteria. A crash sounded from the kitchen then, a bowl shattering. "Oh, Monica's voice started, then rose. "Why is everything in this house so old? Why is every drawer uneven? Why is every shelf crooked? This place is a disaster, a museum. It's impossible to cook here." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who moved everything I owned was somehow surprised things were no longer where they belonged. Daniel exhaled heavily. Monica, please. No, Daniel, I can't. I can't do this. Your mother doesn't understand how hard pregnancy is. She doesn't understand what it's like to prepare for a baby in a house that fights you at every turn. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. The house isn't fighting you, Monica. You're fighting the house. She froze for half a second, just enough to betray that she hadn't expected me to challenge her at all. Look, she said, taking a breath and switching into a tone adults use on small children or elderly relatives they're convinced are fragile. We just need the space to work for everyone, Martha. Everyone, in this case, meant the two of them. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, maybe you could adjust. Be more flexible. It would help the baby. There it was again, the baby-shaped shield they kept hiding behind. I've been flexible, I said. I moved rooms. I stepped aside. I've stayed quiet. Exactly, Monica said, misunderstanding entirely. So let's try to keep everything smooth. Smooth, like sandpaper. I looked around the kitchen, at the jars she'd rearranged, at the spices she'd thrown into different drawers, at the apron she'd hung on the hook where George's old cap used to rest. None of it was mine anymore. Not the placement, not the order, not even the air. Monica walked to the stove, lifted one of my cast iron pans, and frowned at the weight. We need to get rid of these ancient things. My mother said good cookware should be light. These are rustic. Rustic. The pans. George seasoned by hand. The pans that had never failed me. The pans that had cooked every Sunday dinner of our marriage. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom, don't make that face. I'm not making any face. You're judging. I'm observing, I corrected him. Monica slammed the pan down. This can't continue. We need order, predictability, harmony. And we can't have harmony if someone keeps leaving the kitchen messy. Messy. My kitchen. I had to steady myself on the edge of the counter. The room felt tilted somehow, not from age, but from misuse, like a book one tries to read upside down. Monica, I said, if there's something out of place, it's because you moved it. She scoffed. Well, maybe the new layout makes sense. Maybe it's time you accepted that things need to change. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because right then, behind them in my mind, I saw the brown folder in my closet, saw the neat stack of documents inside, saw the deed with my name alone on it, saw the old rental agreements George drafted in neat, careful handwriting. Monica was still talking, something about modernizing and a fresh start. Daniel was nodding, helpless and distracted. The two of them moved around the kitchen like they owned it. And I stood there, quiet, still, remembering something I'd almost forgotten. Ownership doesn't shout. Ownership doesn't fuss. Ownership waits, softly, patiently, until the day it speaks. It happened 3 days later, in the afternoon, when the house was glowing with that pale winter light that makes everything look honest, even things you wish would stay hidden. I'd just finished folding laundry in the small room they now called mine, though it felt more like a borrowed corner of my life. The door was half open, letting in the smell of fresh paint from the hallway. Mint again. They were coating everything in that color. I heard them before I saw them. Daniel's low voice, Monica's sharper one, both walking with the slow, self-important steps of people coming to deliver news they believed would sound reasonable. Mom? Daniel knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. They did that often now, as if doors were only symbolic. Monica stepped in behind him, holding a stack of papers and a measuring tape. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her face composed in that serene expression pregnant women sometimes use to mask irritation. I could already tell this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an announcement. Daniel cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the baby's room." I kept folding my dish towels, aligning the edges the way George used to like. I didn't look up. Not because I wanted to ignore them, but because I wanted to enter the moment slowly, on my own terms. "The nursery," Monica clarified, taking a small breath. "We've thought a lot about it. And we think," she glanced at Daniel, who nodded, "your old bedroom is the best choice." I folded one more towel. "My old bedroom," I repeated. "Yes," Monica said, overly patient. "It's the perfect size. The sun comes in from the east, and the closet is big enough for the baby's things, much bigger than the guest room storage." Daniel added, "It's also quieter, for naps." I set the towel down on the bed. "And where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" "In here," Monica said, gesturing around the cramped room that barely fit my bed and a lamp. "It's cozy, and you're close to the bathroom. At your age, that's convenient." My age. An invisible weight pressed against the back of my ribs. Not anger yet, just awareness, like the first tremor before a storm. Daniel must have sensed the shift in the air because he spoke up quickly, as if to soften the blow. "Mom, be reasonable. Babies need space. This is temporary. Once we get our feet under us, we'll move out. You know we will." I looked at him then. Really looked. The boy I once pushed on swings until my arms ached. The young man who used to call home just to hear my voice when he first moved away. Now standing in front of me with the posture of someone who believes his needs outweigh everyone else's. "Temporary," I echoed. "But you've already been here 3 months." Monica bristled. "We told you. The housing market is impossible right now, and with the baby." "Yes," I said softly, "with the baby." A phrase now used to justify the removal of walls, boundaries, and, apparently, my existence. Monica stepped closer, placing the measuring tape on my dresser as if she were marking territory. "We need to start moving things today. I already bought the crib. It's being delivered tomorrow morning. Daniel will move your boxes." "Boxes?" I asked. She hesitated for only a moment. "We packed up a few of your things. We thought we were being helpful." I imagined her hands in my drawers, touching the scarves George bought me, the photographs I kept tucked between books, the letters from my sister I never showed anyone. Strangers in my memories. Daniel smiled the way people smile when they're hoping to defuse a bomb they just built themselves. "Mom, it's all going to be fine. Let's not make this difficult." There it was again. Difficult. A word children use when their elders dare to have a spine. I walked to the dresser and gently lifted the measuring tape off its surface. Its cold metal edges dug into my palm. "Monica," I said, keeping my voice level, "did you clear this with me? Did you ask me before moving my things?" She blinked, confused at the idea that consent might be required. "We didn't want to overwhelm you. Change is hard for older people." Older people. My hands tightened around the tape. Daniel took a step toward me. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a room." "No," I said quietly. "It's not just a room." They both waited. I let the silence sit between us long enough that even the dust motes seemed to pause in the air. "That room," I continued, "is where your father lay for 3 days after his surgery, and I sat beside him every hour. That room is where I wrote letters I never sent, where I prayed for you when you were sick at 16, where I learned to sleep alone after George died. It is not just a room." Monica's expression tightened into something brittle. "Well, sentiment doesn't solve practical problems." Daniel nodded. "We need the space." I breathed in, slow, calm, controlled. Then I stepped past them and walked toward the hallway. They followed, assuming I was walking away in resignation. Instead, I went straight to the hall closet, reached up, and pulled down the heavy brown folder, the same one I had taken out days earlier, but now with purpose. I turned around. "Since you need space," I said, "we're going to talk about terms." Daniel frowned. "Terms?" Monica crossed her arms. "What terms?" I opened the folder just enough for the edge of the deed to show. "The terms," I said, "of living in my home." Their faces shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, then the first faint flicker of fear. "We'll continue this in the kitchen," I added. "And this time, you will listen." I walked ahead of them, the folder under my arm like a quiet declaration. If they wanted to claim my bedroom, my walls, my life, then they were about to learn exactly whose roof stood over their heads. By morning, the mint paint had dried. I could smell it from the kitchen. Sweet, artificial, the kind of scent that tries too hard to mask what it really is. I stood at the counter buttering a piece of toast when I heard Daniel's heavy footsteps in the hallway and Monica's lighter, quicker ones behind him. They whispered, then stopped whispering when they saw I was awake. Monica appeared first, her hair pulled back, wearing a shirt she'd ruined with paint stains. She looked strangely triumphant, as though she'd won a battle I didn't remember fighting. "We made a lot of progress last night," she announced, without waiting for my response. Daniel stepped in and leaned against the doorframe, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, the room looks good. Really good. You'll see." I didn't answer. I placed the toast on a plate, added a slice of peach, and sat down. There is a power in silence when you've earned your years. Monica sighed as if patience itself were an inconvenience. "We painted your old room," she said, voice bright enough to grate. "It looks so much lighter now. Peaceful. Perfect for a baby." She waited for praise, or acceptance, or some kind of concession. When none came, she pressed on. "St. And we moved your things into the small room. We tried to keep everything organized." Tried. Such a generous word. I rose from the table and walked toward the hallway. They followed me, Daniel already preparing explanations. Monica wearing a determined smile like armor. My old bedroom door was open. The morning sun fell across the floorboards, illuminating a room that no longer belonged to me. The soft mint walls looked even paler in daylight. The quilt I'd made was nowhere in sight. The rug George loved, the one we'd bought on our honeymoon, was rolled into the corner like an afterthought. And then I saw it. My dresser. It wasn't gone this time. It was open. Gutted. Drawers pulled out, half empty. My scarves tossed in a plastic bin. My jewelry box moved to the floor, lid crooked, the necklace George gave me on our 10th anniversary tangled with Monica's hair ties. Something inside me went still. Stillness, I've learned, is not always calm. Sometimes it is the exact moment before something changes forever. Daniel stepped forward, lifting his hands as if calming a startled animal. "Mom, don't make that face. It's just things. You still have them." Monica chimed in quickly. "We didn't throw anything away. Not yet. Not yet." I walked to the dresser and picked up the jewelry box. My fingers brushed the small silver clasp. My hands shook, not from age, but from insult, from intrusion, from the quiet violence of being treated as though nothing that belonged to me mattered, unless it was useful to them. "You opened my drawers," I said softly. Daniel shifted his weight. "We needed to sort everything. For the baby. Always the baby. The shield. The justification. The reason to take, rearrange, erase." Monica crossed her arms over her stomach. I don't understand why you're so upset. We're doing all of this for your grandson. He isn't born yet, I replied. And when he is, she shot back, he'll need space. He'll need peace, not clutter. Clutter. I looked slowly around the room, at the mint walls, at the crib parts laid out, waiting to be assembled, at my belongings shoved aside to make room for someone who wasn't even here yet. My things are not clutter, I said. Monica rolled her eyes. We're trying to make this house functional. That room was too big for you anyway. You don't need all that space. Daniel sighed loudly. Mom, please don't start. This is temporary. We've told you that. You're being... He stopped himself. But the word hung there anyway. Difficult. I turned to Monica, who was already kneeling next to the dresser, pulling out more of my things, my letters, my photos, stacking them into piles, as if preparing them for disposal. She held up a small envelope. Do you really need all these old papers? They're yellowed. Some of them are falling apart. We can scan whatever's important. She didn't open the envelope, but she handled it carelessly, bending the corner. That envelope held the last letter my sister ever wrote me. I hadn't read it in years, but it was mine. Put it down, I said. She blinked at my tone. I'm just organizing. Put it down. Her lips tightened. Slowly, she returned it to the pile. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at him, my son, grown, tired, stressed, but not blind. He knew. Deep down, beneath the excuses and justifications, he knew what they were doing, and he was choosing convenience over respect. That choice has a cost. I reached for the jewelry box again, then turned and walked out of the room. Quiet, controlled. But this time, my silence wasn't surrender. In the hallway, the sunlight fell across the wooden floor, catching on a small scuff mark near the closet. George made that mark years ago, dragging in a heavy toolbox after fixing the back stairs. I remembered him cursing under his breath, then laughing when I teased him about always denting something. I opened the hall closet and took down the brown folder once more, holding it carefully. The edges felt firm in my hands. Steady, trustworthy. Behind me, Monica's voice floated down the hallway again. Should we move her armchair next? It's too big for that small room. I closed the closet door gently, the latch clicking like a heartbeat. They had finished taking my bedroom. They were not going to take anything else. Not my dignity, not my space, not my home. I didn't open the folder right away. I carried it with me to the small room, my new room, and set it on the bed like something fragile. The sunlight slid across the floorboards in a thin, pale ribbon, catching the dust suspended in the still air. For a long moment, I just looked at it. The brown cardboard, the worn edges, the faint smell of cedar from the closet. Then I opened it. The papers inside were exactly where I'd left them years ago. My handwriting, George's handwriting, notes in the margins. Copies of things we kept just in case, though back then, neither of us imagined we'd need them for anything like this. The top document was the deed. My name printed clearly, unshared, unchallenged. I ran my fingertip along the ink, slow and careful, as if greeting an old ally. Beneath it were insurance papers, property tax receipts, and a small envelope of photographs I had forgotten were tucked there. Photos of the house when we first bought it, before the porch had been added, before the garden took root, before the walls held 40 years of our conversations and quarrels and quiet forgiveness. I slipped one out. Me and George standing on the front lawn, squinting into the sun, holding the keys. We looked young enough to believe we'd be young forever. My throat tightened. I placed the photo aside and pulled out the last stack. George's rental forms. Drafted by hand, carefully typed later, signed by tenants long gone. He had used them when he rented the back room to students to earn a little extra when Daniel was starting high school. I remembered how proud he'd been of those forms, how he said they made the house feel useful. The signature lines were still blank on some copies. The house might feel useful again. A soft knock sounded at the door, barely a tap. I didn't move. Another tap. Then the door opened slightly, and a face I hadn't seen in months peeked through. Helen Newton, my neighbor from across the street. "Martha?" she whispered. "Are you awake?" I closed the folder instinctively, though she wasn't the kind of woman who'd pry. "Come in, Helen." She stepped inside with that little shuffle she always had, her knees stiff from the cold. She carried a bag of muffins, blueberry, the kind she makes when she's worried about something or someone. "I saw the moving truck yesterday," she said, setting the bag on the dresser. "I thought maybe you'd decided to move, but then I saw it was your son and his wife. They were busy." Busy was a kind word for what they were. She looked at me carefully, her eyes tracing the room, the boxes, the way my things had been squeezed into corners. "Are you doing all right, dear?" I sat on the edge of the bed. "They took my bedroom." Helen didn't gasp or say, "Oh, honey," the way some women might. She just sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine, grounding me. "That room belonged to you and George?" she said softly. "Yes." "And they didn't ask?" "No." She exhaled slowly. "Martha, you can't let them do that. This is your home." "I know." She studied me for a long moment. Not pitying, just seeing. Really seeing. "You're planning something." It wasn't a question. I opened the folder just enough for her to glimpse the papers inside. The deed, the forms, the proof, the... "You remember when George rented the back room to that engineering student? The one who played the saxophone at odd hours?" Helen chuckled. "I remember. He practiced until the neighbors threatened to nail his door shut." I nodded. "We have the old contracts, and we kept the additions to the house separate. Legally, the guest room and back room can be rented, and the rest," I tapped the deed, "is not theirs to claim." Helen's smile faded, replaced by something firmer. "You're not going to let them stay for free anymore." "I'm not going to let them take my home from me piece by piece," I corrected. She squeezed my hand. "It's about time." I sat with her for another few minutes, the room warm with shared understanding. When she left, she paused at the doorway. "Whatever you decide, Martha," she said, "make sure it reminds them who you are, who I was, who I still am." I waited until the front door clicked shut behind her. Then I pulled the rental forms from the folder and placed them neatly on the desk. The ink would dry the same way it did 40 years ago, quietly, thoroughly, undeniably. They wanted my bedroom. They were about to learn the cost of living under my roof. That evening, the house felt oddly calm, as if it were holding its breath with me. Daniel and Monica had gone to a prenatal class, something about breathing techniques and swaddling, and for the first time in days, the place wasn't humming with their noise. I took advantage of the quiet. I needed to hear myself think. I'd spread the rental forms across the dining table, smoothing each page with the flat of my hand. George had always said that paperwork was like a backbone. A life bends without it. Back then, I didn't understand. Now I did. Papers were power, especially when everyone else in the house forgot you had any. The pen sat on the table beside me, its weight steady, familiar. I didn't sign anything yet. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to approach this the way I approached everything important in my life. slowly, with intention, without the heat of anger. The front porch creaked then, just once. A soft, uncertain sound. I knew immediately who it was. Only one person in my family walked like someone hoping not to disturb the ground, the way children do when they're afraid of breaking something. My granddaughter, Lily. The door opened a few seconds later, and she slipped inside, cheeks rosy from the cold, dark hair tucked behind her ears. 19 years old, studying nursing, working part-time at the grocery store. The only person who still came to see me without needing anything. "Grandma?" she called gently. "I'm in the dining room," I answered. She walked in and stopped when she saw the papers on the table. "Are you doing taxes early?" "No," I said. "I'm doing something else." She pulled out a chair and sat beside me, setting her backpack at her feet. For a moment, she just looked, trying to make sense of the forms. Then she looked at me. "What's going on?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to say, but because Lily deserved truth delivered carefully. She had grown up between her father's temper and Monica's coldness. She understood more than they ever realized. "Your father and Monica," I said slowly, "moved into my bedroom." Lily's eyebrows lifted in a way that reminded me of her mother, a woman long gone from our family, but never forgotten. "Without asking you?" "Without asking," I confirmed. "And they moved your things?" Her voice sharpened with quiet outrage. "They decided the baby needed the room," I said. "They decided I didn't." Lily ran a hand over her face. "I knew Dad would take advantage of you, Grandma, but not like this. Not your room. It seems they think I've become flexible," I said. She leaned closer. "So the papers, you're kicking them out?" "Eventually," I replied, "but not before I remind them that being my family does not make them the owners of my home." Lily stared at the forms again. "You're really going to make them pay rent?" "Yes." A slow, delighted smile spread across her face. "Good." Her approval warmed something in me. Not pride, exactly, but recognition. As if someone finally saw the line that had been crossed. She reached for one of the forms. "Did Grandpa make these?" "He drafted the first versions," I said. I updated them a little. Lily traced the edge of the paper thoughtfully. "Dad's going to lose his mind." "He might," I said. "And Monica," she added, "is going to act like you committed a crime?" "No doubt." Lily sat back, watching me in that quiet, observant way she has. "How do you feel?" I considered the question. It had been a long time since anyone asked me that. Not about my health, not about errands or needs, but about my feelings. "I feel," I said slowly, "like I have a matchbook in my pocket, and I've just remembered the house is mine." Lily let out a soft laugh, half disbelief, half admiration. "Grandma, I wish they knew you the way I do." "They don't want to know me," I said simply. "They want me to be convenient." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." For a moment, I had to look down at the table so she wouldn't see the heat rising behind my eyes. I hadn't heard those words in years. We sat quietly for a while, the winter evening slipping deeper into the house. When she stood to leave, she hugged me longer than usual. "If you need help, anything, call me, okay?" "I will," I said, and meant it. After she left, the silence returned. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt full of intention, full of clarity. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, then placed the finished draft of the rental agreement on top. Tomorrow, when Daniel and Monica returned from their errands and routines and whispered criticisms, I would hand them the truth. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the same quiet tone they mistook for weakness. the tone of someone who remembers exactly who she is. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't from worry. My mind was steady, focused, sorting through details the way George used to when something needed fixing. By morning, the house was alive again, with the sound of Daniel and Monica moving about. Drawers opening, water running, voices murmuring low and irritated. They must have noticed I'd put some of my belongings back in their proper places. Nothing dramatic. Just enough for them to feel the shift. After breakfast, when the house had settled into its uneasy quiet, I put on my coat and took the rental forms from the table. I didn't tell them where I was going. They didn't ask. The winter air bit at my cheeks as I stepped outside. The sky was the color of cold tin, flat and heavy. Perfect weather for clarity. The law office sat 3 blocks down, a small brick building between a barber shop and an insurance agency. I'd walked past it for years without ever needing it. Inside, the warmth felt almost indulgent. A receptionist with soft gray curls looked up from her desk. "Good morning. How can we help you?" "I'd like to see Mr. Harmon," I said. "If he has a moment." She checked the schedule. "He can see you in 5 minutes." "Please, take a seat." I sat on the couch near the window, holding the folder in my lap. I looked like any other older woman dealing with paperwork. Small, quiet, forgettable. But the weight in my hands felt like a spine straightening. "Mrs. Ellington?" the receptionist called. I followed her to a modest office where a man in his 60s rose to greet me. "Martha," he said warmly. "It's been a long time." "Hello, Robert," I replied. "I need your help." He gestured for me to sit. "What's going on?" I opened the folder and laid the deed on the desk. His eyebrows lifted. "This is straightforward. The house is yours alone." "Yes," I said. "My son and his wife have moved in temporarily, and now they are taking rooms, making changes, treating the house as theirs." He nodded, expression shifting into something more professional. "Are you concerned about eviction issues, property damage, overstaying?" "All of it," I said calmly. "But I'm not angry. I'm prepared." He took off his glasses, studying me. "You want to formalize their stay?" "I do." I slid the draft rental agreements toward him. "George wrote these years ago. I've adjusted the details. I'd like them reviewed and made legally sound." He flipped through them, page by page, frowning slightly at first, then nodding. "Your husband was thorough. This is a good foundation." He looked up. "You understand what this means? Once they sign, they become tenants, and tenants can be evicted." "Yes," I said simply. "And if they refuse to sign," he added, "we can issue a notice requiring them to vacate within 30 days. That will be necessary." He leaned back, exhaling. "You've thought this through." "I've had time," I said. "More than they realize." He studied me a moment longer, then smiled. Not sympathetically, but respectfully. "I'll finalize everything today. Come back this afternoon and I'll have the documents ready for you. You'll need to serve them in person." "I will," I said. When I stood, he placed a gentle hand on the folder. "Martha, most people don't find this courage at 74. I looked at him steadily. "It isn't courage, Robert. It's memory. I'm remembering what belongs to me." Outside, the cold air no longer felt sharp. It felt clean. I walked home slowly, my steps measured, my breath steady. Through the living room window, I saw Monica rearranging my furniture again, her movements brisk and territorial. Daniel hovered behind her, tired, dismissive, unaware. They believed they knew who I was. But by tonight, they would learn something new. Silence is not surrender. It is preparation. By late afternoon, the sky hung low and gray, pressing against the roofs like a held breath. I walked back from the law office with the finalized documents tucked inside my coat, the papers warm from my body heat. Mr. Harmon had placed them in a neat folder, labeled with quiet certainty, tenancy agreement. Beneath it, clipped together, were the notices of non-compliance and the 30-day vacate forms. Tools. Clean, simple tools. The kind people forget older women still know how to use. When I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices through the front window. Daniel's frustration sharp. Monica's irritation brittle. They were arguing about supplies for the baby. I stood for a moment and listened, not out of curiosity, but out of understanding. People reveal themselves when they think the person they depend on isn't listening. "I'm tired of this house," Monica snapped. "Nothing is where it should be. Your mother keeps moving things back. I swear she's doing it to annoy me." "She's just old-fashioned," Daniel said. "Ignore it." "I can't ignore it," Monica said. "We need control over this place if the baby is going to be raised in any kind of order." That word, control, settled like a cold stone in my stomach. I opened the front door. They stopped mid-sentence, both turning toward me with the guilty stiffness of children caught stealing cookies. "Oh," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Mom? Didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," I said, hanging up my coat. Monica crossed her arms. "We were just discussing the nursery." "I'm aware." I walked past them into the kitchen and placed the folder on the table. Not forcefully, not dramatically. Just with the kind of care one uses when setting down something important. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" I sat, folded my hands, and nodded toward the chairs. "Sit, both of you." The way their eyes flickered, to each other, to the folder, back to me, told me they'd never expected a 74-year-old woman to sound like someone giving orders. They sat, slowly. I opened the folder and slid the first set of documents toward them. The paper made a soft whisper against the wood, quiet, but final. "These," I said, "are the terms under which you will continue to live in my home." Daniel blinked. "Terms?" Monica's voice tightened. "What is this?" "A rental agreement," I said. "Legally binding, reviewed this morning. You will read it carefully and sign." Silence fell over the room, and for a moment, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and Monica's uneven breathing. Daniel gave a laugh, thin, disbelieving. "Mom? You're not serious." "I am," I said. "You're making us pay rent?" His voice cracked in the middle, the way it used to when he lied as a boy. "I'm giving you the opportunity to live here legally," I answered. "If you choose not to sign, you will receive the vacate notice instead." I tapped the second stack of papers with one finger. Monica snatched up the agreement, flipping through the pages. "This is insane. You can't treat us like tenants. We're family." "You treated me," I said gently, "like an inconvenience." Daniel's face flushed red. "We didn't mean—" "You took my bedroom," I continued. "You moved my belongings without permission. You rearranged my home to suit your preferences. All of that, Daniel, is how tenants behave when they believe the landlord is too weak to enforce boundaries." Monica slammed the papers down. "We're not signing this." "Then you will leave," I said. "No anger, no threat, just truth." Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom, we don't have another place lined up." "The baby?" "The baby," I said softly, "does not give you ownership of my home." Monica stood abruptly. "This is unbelievable. She's kicking out her own son." "I am holding my son," I corrected, "to the standard any adult should meet. Respect." Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice as if preparing to negotiate. "Mom, be reasonable." I am being reasonable, I said. You moved into my house under the condition of temporary help, not permanent takeover. He swallowed hard. We thought. I know exactly what you thought, I said. You thought my silence meant permission. The kitchen felt too small for the three of us, the air thick with the shift that finally landed where it belonged. Monica pointed at the papers again. So what happens now? You read, I said. You sign, or you pack. Daniel stared at me with something like confusion and something else. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition. That his mother wasn't a shadow in her own home. I closed the folder, folded my hands, and looked at them both with the calm of a woman who has rediscovered her footing after years of letting others take the floor. I'll give you until tomorrow morning, I said quietly, to decide which future you prefer. They didn't come to breakfast the next morning. I sat alone at the kitchen table, hearing their muffled voices upstairs, quick, tense, urgent. The kind of whispers people use when they've lost control and are trying to pretend they haven't. I stirred sugar into my tea and waited. I wasn't rushing them. Decisions made in panic are still decisions. Around 9, Daniel finally came down. He didn't meet my eyes. He opened and closed cabinets pointlessly, the way a person moves when they need to be doing something with their hands. He cleared his throat. Mom, Monica's upset. I'm aware, I said. You should talk to her, he said, still not looking at me. She feels disrespected. I set my teaspoon down. She feels disrespected? He flinched at the tone, not loud, not sharp, but clear. Clear in a way he hadn't heard from me in years. I'm just saying, he muttered. Things could have been handled better. Daniel, I said quietly, look at me. He hesitated, then did. You opened my drawers. You moved my life into boxes. You took my bedroom because it was more convenient for your child than honoring your mother. Tell me, what part of that was handled well? He swallowed. We didn't mean it that way. I know, I said. You meant it the way people mean things when they assume the other person won't push back. Before he could respond, Monica appeared at the foot of the stairs. Her hair was uncombed, her cheeks blotchy from crying or anger, likely both. She held the rental papers in one hand, wrinkled from being clenched all night. This, she said, shaking the pages, is humiliating. What's humiliating, I replied evenly, is being pushed out of my own room without being asked. She marched into the kitchen. We are family. You don't treat family like tenants. You treated me, I said, like a guest you could rearrange. She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. You don't understand how stressful pregnancy is. I need stability, routine. I need my bedroom, I finished. Her lips pressed tight. Yes, because it's best for the baby. I poured myself more tea. And this agreement is best for the homeowner. Daniel stepped forward. Mom, we're asking you to meet us halfway. You crossed the entire house, I said, and then demanded I move the rest of the distance. Monica slapped the pages on the table. Rent? Really? You're charging your own family rent? Yes. Why? She demanded. Because you are living in my home, I said, and behaving as though you own it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us, the only steady sound in the room. Then Monica pulled out a chair and sat heavily, exhaling in defeat. We don't have the money for this. I looked at her. Then you should not be living here. She looked at Daniel, searching his face for support. He looked away. That told me everything. Fine, she said sharply. What happens if we sign? You become official tenants, I said. You pay rent. You respect the rules of the home you occupy, and you stop treating my rooms, my belongings, and my life as your storage space. And if we don't sign, Monica asked, then you receive the 30-day notice. Daniel's voice dropped. Mom, we have nowhere to go. You have options, I said calmly. You always did. You just preferred the easiest one. Monica pressed her palms to her forehead. This is unbelievable. No, I said. This is overdue. Daniel finally sat down, too. Slowly, heavily, as if the chair had turned into something unfamiliar. He looked at the floor. How much is the rent? I told him. Not a cruel number. Not unreasonable. Exactly what the market demanded. What any stranger would pay without blinking. Daniel whispered something to himself. Monica's breath hitched in her chest. Then she looked up at me with anger so thin it was almost fear. You're doing this to punish us. No, I said quietly. I'm doing this to protect myself. The room fell silent again. Real, stunned silence this time. Daniel finally lifted his head. His voice was small in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. We'll talk about it. You have until tomorrow, I reminded them. They stood and left the kitchen without another word. I sat alone again, tea cooling beside me, listening to their footsteps upstairs. Quieter now, uncertain, careful. It was the first carefulness they'd shown since they moved in. And it wouldn't be the last. They didn't come downstairs for most of the afternoon. The house felt strangely peaceful without their voices filling the air, without doors opening and closing as if announcing their ownership. I moved slowly, doing small things, watering the few plants I had left, straightening the books on the living room shelf, folding the blanket across the couch. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I had to ask permission to exist. Around 4, I heard Daniel's steps. Not the rushed, careless ones he usually made, but slow, deliberate ones, like a man walking into a room he didn't want to enter. He found me in the kitchen, slicing apples. Mom, he said quietly. I set down the knife. Daniel. He rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture nervous and familiar. We talked about the agreement. I waited. We don't want to sign it. I nodded once. Then you understand what that means. He closed his eyes briefly, like the truth stung. Monica's been crying all day. She cried, I said softly, after moving my belongings out of my room without hesitation. He winced. I know it wasn't fair, but she's overwhelmed. The baby, I said again, has become the reason you cross every line. He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw shame surface, not deep enough to change him, but deep enough to quiet him. I'm sorry, he said. It was a thin apology, but it was something. I am not punishing you, I said. I am setting boundaries. You're adults, Daniel. You chose to live here. Now you choose how. He nodded, swallowing hard. We're going to start looking for another place. That would be wise. He sat at the table slowly, as if his legs were heavier than usual. Mom, I didn't realize how much we were taking from you. Yes, I said. You didn't realize because it was easy not to. He looked at the floor. How soon do we have to leave? I placed a single sheet of paper in front of him, the official notice. It looked small, simple, but it carried weight. 30 days, I said. He didn't touch it, just stared at it. I guess we pushed you too far. You pushed me out, I corrected him. There's a difference. His shoulders slumped. Monica won't take this well. She hasn't taken anything well, I said, unless it benefited her. Daniel let out a long breath. We'll figure it out. You will, I said. You always do. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say more. something soft. Something reaching back toward the years when he trusted me without hesitation. But the moment passed. He stood. "I'll tell her," he said quietly. "Do that." He started toward the stairs, then paused. "Mom? Are you angry at me?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I'm disappointed, but not angry." He nodded, and somehow that seemed to land harder. After he disappeared upstairs, the house grew quiet again, peaceful, but heavy with the shift that had finally settled. Tomorrow, the real packing would begin. Tomorrow, they would understand what it meant to be held accountable. Tonight, though, I sat at the kitchen table, the notice still lying there, and breathed easier than I had in months. They began packing in silence the next morning. No dramatic sighs, no slammed doors, no whispered complaints drifting through the vents. Just the muted sounds of drawers opening, boxes unfolding, the rustle of clothing being folded too quickly. It was the first time their noise didn't feel like intrusion. It sounded more like departure. I stood in the hallway, not hiding, not supervising, simply present. Daniel carried down a stack of folded shirts, his steps heavy. Monica followed a few minutes later, moving more slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. Even now, even after everything, I felt a small tug of sympathy. Pregnancy is hard, but hardship never justifies cruelty. She avoided my eyes when she passed me. I didn't stop her. I didn't speak. Some lessons don't need narration. Daniel set the shirts near the door, exhaling. "We'll try to be out before the 30 days, he said. "We don't want to drag this out." "That's wise," I replied. He nodded, then hesitated. "We'll clean the room, the big one, before we go." I appreciated that more than I showed. "Thank you." Upstairs, their footsteps resumed, slowly, grudgingly. It's strange how the act of packing reveals a person. Monica wrapped only her fragile things carefully. Everything else she shoved into bags. Daniel paused over certain items, an old photo, an old jacket, then tucked them away with quiet regret. Around noon, I made myself a small sandwich. The kitchen felt peaceful again, sunlight catching the rim of my favorite mug. For a few minutes, I let myself breathe in the calm, the way a person inhales deeply after a long-held breath. Then I heard a soft knock at the doorway. It was Monica. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She looked younger than she had in weeks, almost like the girl she must have once been before life hardened her edges. "Martha," she said quietly, "can I talk to you?" "Of course," I replied. She stepped inside, holding her hands together the way people do when they're trying not to tremble. "I know you think I'm awful." I didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I really wasn't. I panic when things feel out of control. And this pregnancy has been—" She shook her head. "I don't feel like myself, and I took it out on your space. Your things. I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't even complete. But it was the first honest thing she'd said to me since moving in. "Thank you," I said softly. "I accept your apology." She looked startled by that, maybe expecting bitterness. She wasn't wrong to expect it, but life is too short to carry every burden someone hands you. "I didn't think you'd go this far," she whispered. "The papers. The notice." "I didn't think you'd take my bedroom," I replied gently. A lone tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly and nodded. "We'll be out soon." I watched her leave the kitchen, her steps slower now, her shoulders less sharp. Not humbled, just human, finally. By late afternoon, the living room filled with stacked boxes, taped and labeled. Daniel carried the crib pieces down from my old bedroom, pausing, I noticed, each time he passed the doorway, as if the mint-painted walls finally embarrassed him. Near dinner time, he came to me again, standing in the threshold like a boy waiting for permission. "We'll finish the rest tomorrow," he said. "And then, we'll go. All right?" He looked down at his hands. "Mom, you don't need to say anything," I said gently. "Just learn from it." He nodded, and he left the doorway without finishing his sentence. That night, when the house grew quiet, I walked the hallway alone. The scent of their packing tape still lingered, mixing with the faint mint from the nursery walls. I stood outside my old bedroom, not stepping in, not touching anything, just letting the stillness settle. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, a house returning to its rightful shape, and a woman doing the same. They left on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun began to warm the frost off the lawn. Not all at once. People rarely exit a place they've claimed so carelessly in one clean motion. Instead, it happened in fragments. A box carried to the car, a hesitation by the door, another trip upstairs for something forgotten. I stayed in the kitchen, not hiding, but not hovering. Some departures must be witnessed from a distance. Daniel came down first, holding 2 suitcases. His face was drawn, the lines around his mouth tighter than I'd seen in years. He didn't look angry anymore, just tired. He set the bags near the door and leaned against the frame as if needing it to stay upright. "Mom," he said quietly, we'll keep in touch." I stirred my tea. "I hope you do." He nodded, his eyes dropping, unable to meet mine for long. There was a moment, small, fragile, when he looked like he might say something real. But whatever it was, he held it back. Some truths require more courage than he had that morning. Monica appeared next, her coat unbuttoned, her hair pulled into a loose knot. She didn't look defiant. She looked worn thin, softer somehow. She carried a single box labeled nursery, the handwriting uneven. She paused when she saw me. "We cleaned the bedroom," she said. "Every surface." "Thank you." She nodded, then pressed a hand to her belly. "I do appreciate what you did for us, before all of this." "And I hope," I replied gently, "one day you'll understand why I did this as well." Her eyes shimmered for just a moment. Then she turned away. They loaded the last of their things, the sound of car doors opening and closing, marking the end of a chapter. I stepped to the porch, not to watch them go, but to breathe the air outside my house without tension, sitting on my shoulders. Daniel lingered near the car, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Mom," he said again, "I'm sorry." This time, there was something truer behind it. "I know," I said. "Take care of your family." He nodded once, then climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started. The tires crunched over the gravel drive. And then they were gone. No shouting, no slammed doors, no last-minute appeals. Just quiet. A quiet so deep it felt like the house exhaled with me. I stood on the porch for a long minute, letting the cold breeze brush against my cheeks. The neighborhood was the same as always. The Miller boy tossing a basketball in the driveway across the street. Mrs. Havens pulling weeds she'd never win against. But everything felt subtly rearranged, like the world had tilted a few degrees into place. When I finally stepped inside, the house greeted me not with emptiness, but with stillness. A stillness that felt right. The living room was mine again, my books, my blanket, my rhythm. The hallway no longer echoed with someone else's frustrations. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and the apples I'd sliced yesterday. And then I walked to the doorway of my old bedroom. I didn't enter, not yet, but I looked inside, looked at the mint walls, the crib pieces stacked neatly in the corner, the sunlight settling across the bare floorboards. The room didn't feel stolen anymore. It felt like something in between endings and beginnings, resting, waiting for direction. My direction. I closed the door gently, without locking it. There would be time later to decide what the room should become next. For now, I went back to the living room, sat in my old armchair, and let the simple truth settle into my bones. The house was quiet, and so at last was I. Not silenced, simply whole. The first morning alone felt almost unreal. The house wasn't just quiet, it was honest. No footsteps that didn't belong to me, no voices behind doors, no rearranged objects shifting the rhythm of my days. I walked through each room slowly, not to inspect, but to reacquaint myself with the space. A home can forget its owner when too many hands pull at it. In the kitchen, the sunlight fell through the window exactly the way it used to, landing in a soft gold square on the floor. I set the kettle on the stove and listened to the familiar click of the burner. Such a small sound, but for weeks it had been drowned out by someone else's demands. Now it rang clear. I made my tea the way I liked, strong, with honey and a slice of lemon, and sat at the table. No one rushed me. No one commented on efficiency or baby-safe surfaces. The house didn't ask anything of me except to breathe inside it. Later that day, I went to the hardware store and bought a fresh pair of gardening gloves. Mine had gone missing sometime in their stay. I didn't ask who'd taken them or why. Some things aren't worth tracing back. Outside, the soil was still hard from winter, but I raked the old leaves away and trimmed the dead stems from my rose bushes. The simple work steadied me. Dirt under your nails does that, reminds you you're still part of something living. Midway through pruning, I heard a voice behind the fence. "Martha? That you?" I looked up to see Sam, the college student renting the little studio behind Mrs. Newton's place. He was a polite young man, always waved, always carried his backpack on one shoulder as if he didn't want to appear too comfortable anywhere. "Afternoon, Sam," I said. "You're home early." "Exam got canceled," he replied, smiling. "Mrs. Newton told me your family moved out. House must feel different." "It does," I said. "Quieter, lighter." He nodded thoughtfully. "If you ever need help with anything heavy, lifting boxes or furniture, just let me know. I can pay you back for all the muffins you've given me over the fence." I laughed. Those were hardly debts. Still, his offer lingered with a warmth I didn't expect. It had been a long time since someone offered help without an angle. That evening, I returned inside and sat by the window. I watched the porch light flicker on automatically, glowing over the empty drive. I hadn't seen the driveway empty in months. It felt like a deep breath. The next morning, I found myself reaching for the rental forms again, but not for the reason Daniel had. I realized, sitting there at the dining table, that I had more space than I needed now. More space than a single woman should let sit still. This house wasn't just meant to be defended. It was meant to be lived in. I called the community college and asked if they still needed housing referrals. They did. They always did. Young people needing places to stay while finishing degrees or working part-time. People like the ones who once rented George's back room decades ago. By afternoon, I had printed out 2 simple listings, one for the guest room, one for the upstairs nook that had once been Daniel's study. Reasonable prices, clear expectations. My space, offered on my terms. I placed them on the counter and stood back. The house looked larger than it had in years, wider, like it was stretching after being cramped too long. For the first time since George passed, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Purpose, not survival, not endurance. not waiting for someone else's decisions. A quiet, steady forward motion. The beginning of a life shaped by my own hands again. A week passed before I allowed myself to open the door to my old bedroom again. Not because I feared what I'd find, but because healing sometimes needs a little distance. The mint paint had lost its sharp smell. The crib pieces were gone. The room felt empty, but not wounded anymore. Just waiting. I stepped inside and let my hand brush the wall. It was cool beneath my fingers. Still mine, despite everything. I opened the window and let the morning air in. Fresh, crisp, clean. The curtains fluttered, lifting the heaviness that had settled here for months. I didn't rush to change anything. I didn't drag furniture around or try to reclaim it in one sweeping motion. I simply stood in the middle of the floor and asked myself a question I hadn't asked in years. What do you want now, Martha? Not what Daniel expected. Not what Monica demanded. Not what age or grief or loneliness prescribed. Me. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, watching dust float in the sunlight. The house made its soft, familiar creaks, the ones I used to mistake for ghosts after George died. Now, they just sounded like an old friend stretching her bones. A soft knock at the front door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Sam stood there holding a potted plant, something green and cheerful, with broad leaves. "Mrs. Ellington?" he said, smiling shyly. "I heard you were fixing up the place. Thought this might brighten a room." It had been a long time since someone brought something to my door without expecting anything in return. "Thank you, Sam," I said. "Come in." We talked in the living room, about his classes, about the internship he hoped to get in the spring, about the tiny studio he rented where the heat clanked at night. He glanced around the house with a kind of quiet respect. "This place feels peaceful," he said. "It didn't," I replied. "But it does now." He looked at the rental forms on the table. "You're really going to rent out rooms?" "I am." He nodded thoughtfully. "Someone's going to be lucky to live here." After he left, the house settled again. But it didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility, of open doors and second chances. My steps echoed differently, as if the floors recognized me again. That evening, I placed the new plant on the dresser in my old bedroom. A single green leaf brushed my wrist, light as breath. I smiled at the simplicity of it. Later, as I made tea, I noticed something I hadn't before. The silence no longer carried the weight of being alone. It carried the comfort of being free, free of interruptions, free of demands, free of letting myself shrink to keep others comfortable. I sat in my armchair, the one they'd once tried to haul to the basement, and watched the porch light glow across the lawn. A soft, steady light, a reminder. You get to choose who enters your home. You get to choose who enters your peace. And sometimes the quiet you fight for is the quiet that saves you. When I finally went to bed, I didn't sleep in the small room. I slept where I belonged. In my own bedroom. Under my own roof. On my own terms. And when I closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Not victory. Not triumph. Dignity. If Martha's story touched you, share your thoughts or feelings. Your voice matters more than you think.